Gather round me, children, I'll tell you the news. Don't worry about the names or dates, you already know it's true. Your doctor hates your baby, the prime minister's a ghost, and all them folks are sailing here 'cause they're in love with boats. Superfoods can save us from all our evil sin. JFK and Elvis own a bar in Wisconsin. And vaccinations were created by the CIA to steal votes from Bernie Sanders and turn your babies gay. So click the link you think you like and get tooled for a fight against those lefty fascist communists who are leaning too far right.
Hello and welcome to Not Another Fake Newscast. I'm Jerry, and today we have a very interesting interview for you from a man known as Mike Stuchbery. Mike is famous for his work writing about history and in particular debunking the far right in the UK, and he has surged to fame or infamy in the last couple of days because he was doorstepped by Stephen Lennon, or as he is more commonly known, Tommy Robinson. So we spoke with Mike on Sunday, which was literally the evening before he was doorstepped by Tommy Robinson, and yeah, so we spoke in depth about how he came to write, how he got involved in journalism, and we spoke in depth about why we thought it was very probable that he would be doorstepped by Tommy Robinson in the near future, and it proved to be a very prescient interview. If you want to hear from the man who has came into contact with death threats and, the very, very nasty reality of the far right in the UK, then look no further than listen to this interview. We are, as always, available on www.notanotherfakenewscast.com. We are on Twitter and Facebook at PGMcast, and if you want to get in touch with us, you can do so via social media, or you can send us an email at info@notanotherfakenewscast.com. We have a Patreon if you want to donate to the cause for as little as $1 a month. Just go to www.patreon.com/PGMcast, and please throw your weight and support behind Mike going forward. I'm sure he's gonna, experience some difficulty in the next wee while as a result of standing up to what are essentially bullies. We at Not Another Fake Newscast believe that these people are there to be stood up to, and we wish him the very best of luck and offer him our full support over the coming months. So without further ado, let's listen to Mike. Okay, so we're here today with Mike Stuchbery, who you will probably know from Twitter and from his writing for the likes of Byline Media and the Huffington Post. Hi, nice to have you here, Mike.
Hi, how are you? Nice to be talking to you guys.
So I mean, I guess the first question would be, what kind of led you into the sort of writing that you're doing with regards like the history stuff, the social media stuff, the sort of debunking the right wing. How did you find yourself starting to do that?
Okay, well, I began my career as a high school teacher, so I was teaching English and history, mostly history. And after a couple of years of that, I decided I wanted to get out of the classroom, so I got a job working for the Australian government as a researcher, as a kind of fact checker. So what would happen is that museums would give us various artifacts, and we'd have to write or fact check writing about those artifacts, and that sort of really sort of dovetailed into what I'd done at uni as a history student, and I enjoyed writing so much as during my time as a researcher for the government that when I went back to teaching, I started to write for various publications in Australia about history. Whenever there was something in the news, I'd sort of write something for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation that sort of explained the context. So this was back when Richard III was dug up in Leicester. So I sort of wrote about what we could tell from his bones, and how he'd been sort of hacked up by Henry Tudor's forces and stuff like that. And then after a couple of years later, I moved to Germany and I started doing the same thing over there, writing for a blog that I still write for called The Local, submitting articles about the weird shit that happened in my neck of the woods there. I lived in Stuttgart, which is where I met my wife, and sort of exploring the area, you sort of come across these bizarre stories. So I shared them with The Local. And then when I came to Britain, it was just a case that I'd sort of been writing so long that, I just wanted to keep on doing it. But the thing with the far right was, I've been a pretty heavy Twitter user since it came out. I think this is like my fourth account that I'm on now. And I think I was sitting at home one day, just during a period of unemployment, so I'm lying on the couch in my underwear and I see Paul Joseph Watson going on about, the fact that he didn't think that there were any black Romans in England during the during the Roman period, and this was one thing. I mean, it was just fate, just the stars aligning, because this is one thing that I actually happened to know something about in fairly excruciating detail. Like I'd sort of, in various things that I'd done, I sort of knew all the case studies, knew of bones of Syrian soldiers being dug up in various places in York and in Bath. So I knew all of this stuff, so I sort of went at him in a thread, and that went extremely viral overnight. And a couple of weeks later, another guy was talking shit about the Nazis. Ian Miles Chong, who goes by the Twitter name Stuchbery, he was talking, saying, "Oh, the Nazis were socialists." And yet again, this was one thing that I actually knew some shit about. So I just sent a thread, so laying out why the Nazis weren't socialists. Looking at how they worked cozily with corporations. They had all these. I'm just trying to think. I can't remember all of the things that I said, but it was, it was about a 25 tweet thread, sort of, telling him that it was an idiot. And that sort of overnight gave me a reputation as somebody who people would come to, for better or for worse, with their historical questions or, things like that. But over time, the really interesting thing was that the same couple of things came up. And I had a lot of people that were sort of asking questions about the Crusades and the Templars and things like that, and talking about in terms of the Crusades, the Muslims started it. Didn't they start it? And well, no, they didn't. it was much more complex than that. And what else? Talking about Vikings and how the Vikings never came into contact with Islam, which is another more bullshit. It just got me really interested in the idea that history is now really being used as a weapon to sort of recruit and get people supporting some very nasty guys. I mean, the classic example that when this was all happening was Generation Identity were trying to get established in the UK, and their whole thing is their logo is the Spartan lambda symbol. And their whole rhetoric is that, like, Europe is this Christian, monoculture that is being invaded by Islam, and that if you don't sort of protect it, then we're letting down our ancestors, which is, once again, the reality is far, far more complex.
Yeah. I mean, like, you look at the Romans, one of the shining examples of a multicultural society, right?
Exactly.
So I'm curious, though. I have to go back because you said that there was a few interesting stories local to you in Stuttgart. I can't let that go past without hearing one of those.
Oh well, okay. This is there's one that I'm going to be writing for Deutsche Welle in the near future. It's about a guy who lived in the 16th century not too far from Stuttgart. He was a guy called Goetz von Berlichingen. It's a pretty hard name. So I have to always be careful.
It was a good effort.
Goetz. Just call him Goetz. Anyway, Goetz lived in the 16th century. This was just after. It was around the time of the Protestant Reformation, right? And the peasants were getting really pissed off at, the Protestant Reformation had sort of worked its way down to the peasants, and they were like, hang on, we're being treated like shit by the princes and the nobles, and we're not going to take this anymore. And they started to sort of rebel. And at the same time, there was this guy, this nobleman called Goetz, and he was, I guess you'd call him a bit of a robber baron. He was like the kind of guy who would, make his money by, robbing people, essentially. Anybody who sort of crossed his land. He was a bit of an arsehole, but as you'll see as we go on, he's kind of like a likable arsehole. So anyway, this guy, he also sold himself as a mercenary, and during one of his mercenary campaigns, a cannonball sort of hit his I think it hit one arm, and it sort of forced his sword arm to go through his hand, through his arm, and his arm, he's cut off from the just above the wrist. So he's lost one of his hands. So he goes, most people would say, okay, I'm not going to fight anymore. I'm going to sort of give up the whole mercenary game. But Goetz was like, no, fuck that. And he had an iron hand made. So he had like the first one was pretty basic and it couldn't really do much. But then he got the Mark II, which was much more complex, and he could actually hold it. He could actually hold a sword. He could ride a horse with it. So he became Goetz of the Iron Hand, and for the next 20-something years, he was known for just like whoever could afford him bought him, and he was just this force of nature going around and sort of killing. Killed a lot of peasants, but he also sort of fought in a lot of other campaigns between the nobles as well. And he was a bit of a legend, and he was such a legend that Goethe, the famous writer, the famous poet and writer in German literature, wrote a play about him. And there's one scene, the big scene, the climactic scene, is when his castle is surrounded by the emperor's troops because he's been so bad that everybody's basically come for him. And they're like, you got to give up now. You got to get up, Goetz. You got to surrender. There's absolutely no getting out of this. And so he leans out of the castle. And I think Goetz sort of based this on something that was actually written down in a manuscript. But he sort of said, then if he wants me to surrender, then he can kiss my. No, he didn't say kiss. He said lick my ass, lick me an arse. So that's like one of the how we say like to be or not to be, and that's like one of Shakespeare's big lines. Whenever anybody's sort of talking about Goethe's big lines, they quote Goetz von Berlichingen in this play, saying, you can lick my ass. And there's all these little statues of him in the area that have that at the bottom. And he's kind of like a folk hero. He's kind of like a slightly more evil Robin Hood, I guess.
And they based Jamie Lannister on him by the sound of things as well.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, kind of. It sounds like it sounds like that. But the thing that's miraculous about him is that he spent his entire life fighting campaigns across southern Germany, and he was outlawed 4 or 5 different times. And he was wounded in several different life-threatening ways. But he died in his bed at age 83. Which in the 16th century in Germany is pretty fucking amazing. Yeah. It was a great innings.
Metal poisoning, which is the irony of it all. His wrist gave way.
Yeah. So there's like, I mean that sort of ties into my area of interest is the early modern period in Europe. So around this time, around the Protestant Reformation, and Germany at that time was just completely bizarre. I mean, they thought it was the end of the world in many different ways. And that's sort of, it's interesting because I always sort of say that I always used to tell my history students that history echoes, and there's, I sort of feel like sometimes there's a lot of similarities between the 16th century when all these alliances are shifting and print culture is a new thing, and sort of everybody believes whatever they sort of find written in a pamphlet. And I think there are some echoes between the 16th century and right now. So yeah, I'm hoping to go back and do some further study on that and study in the region.
Did you
Yeah.
ever teach in the UK, or was that something that you only did in Australia?
No, I did. I taught in the UK, which was fascinating. I taught in a few schools that were on the coast in England, in Norfolk and Suffolk. So Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft, which is some of the most deprived council wards in England. So that was an eye-opening experience because in Australia I taught in a few fairly I guess it's solidly middle class suburban high schools, and when I was in Germany I was teaching at an international school which was in Stuttgart. So there's a lot of US Army there and a lot of corporations like Daimler and Porsche. So yeah, I was sort of going from the super rich and the US military to teaching, you know, kids that had, their grandparents hadn't had a job. So it was kind of like 3 generations of unemployment. So that was a bit of a culture shock, and it sort of, I had to learn a lot really quickly.
How do you find the way so because you taught the poor, if you will, but the lower class would be in England or deprived areas, how do you find their understanding of like British history, like British Empire? Like, I mean, one of the things that obviously, as we're going to be talking about alt-right and stuff, one of the things that obviously came up recently when the stuff about Churchill and stuff like that was the fact that there's a lot of the Empire's history that's whitewashed to the people of Britain, and like they don't really understand.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these kids, they're not getting much history. I mean, in some of these really deprived schools, it's just what you can manage, because there is a lot of class time that's being lost to all sorts of things. You know, low level, not low level disruption, just disruption in general, and other things. So they sort of get teachers are working really hard, but they kind of get a greatest hits package. Yeah. So they get Romans, the Middle Ages, and then in years 9 and 10 they do the Nazis and World War II very quickly. But it's all very whitewashed. It's extremely it's all very hooray, we beat the Germans with the help of the Americans, and there's no sort of real focus. There's no real focus on colonialism or the British Empire in India or any of those things. The slave trade, I think, is one area where there's a bit of a difference, because in every school that I've ever taught in England, I've taught in 3 in England. They did cover the North Atlantic slave trade fairly in depth, but that seemed to be the only real focus on negative history, so to speak, on the regrettable parts of history that schools could get to.
It's interesting because I done history and higher history.
Yeah, me too.
And I don't recall us ever touching the slave trade.
We didn't
at all.
No, we didn't. No. I mean, we did essentially from the Prussian Revolution up till the First World War. We did. And then the Weimar Republic, everything in Germany up until the Second World War, the events of the Second World War. That was pretty much
that was the higher. Yeah, that was the higher.
I think this is a new thing. I think this is a real sort of push in the last couple of years, and I think that the one thing that they've been able to push through, or the one thing that they've been able to develop the resources and the political will to sort of make sure that every school is doing, is looking at the slave trade at least.
I suppose that's a positive thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would be interesting to see. I mean, it would be almost impossible to do anytime soon. But if British students understood the negative aspects of the empire,
no, I don't.
We're discussing things.
I don't think they do, which is interesting because obviously prior to teaching here, I was in Australia, and I think that Australian kids have a much better idea of the British Empire's various crimes.
I can imagine
both in terms of locally, in terms of the ways in which the Indigenous population of Australia was treated and mistreated by the British in the various colonies, but also I think there's a bit of distance there, because we in Australia, kids learn a lot of world history because there isn't that much of white European history to to learn about. I mean, like, there's a real push for Indigenous history, and that's great and it's fantastic. But as a consequence, they sort of grasp for things to teach kids. So one of the good things is that kids do sort of have an idea of, the spread of, talking about the East India Company and things like that. They are sort of developing a bit of knowledge that kids over here just don't.
I suppose they're all aspects of Australia becoming the country that it is, I suppose, is the other advantage. I don't know if advantage is the right word for that, but essentially, like, the imperialism, the colonialism, and like the East India Company and stuff like that type of thing, is all components of essentially what ended up building Australia to what it is. Because
how do you tell the story of Australia without teaching?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I think it's completely essential to it, and I think they're sort of better at it as well, because of just the way that Australian history runs. When you talk about, for example, the 19th century gold rushes, you can't help but talk about migration and the attracting quality, the attracting factors for people from various places. So, for example, we talk a lot about why people from a certain region of China came to Australia over any other part of China, and talking about what the British were had done in that area in terms of the trade and sort of opening it up. And it's really interesting, because it's just it's really interesting, these little things that sort of I don't quite looking for the words here. They sort of open up history and cause it to be taught in a different way where I'm from. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
I mean, it's positive to hear that that there is it has been taught the sort of intricacies of the empire and the poor treatment of the Indigenous people of Australia has been taught over there, because that was going to be my next question. How did it compare? So at least
well, it's funny, because I think I personally was on the very, like, I was part of the sort of generation, or the class of that was between learning fuck all about it and having it sort of really sort of drummed into us. And I think my generation, when we grew up to be teachers and things like that, I mean, that's when there was the real push towards making sure that students understood that Australia was made up of, I think, something like 300 plus separate Indigenous nations, and that and talking about the fact that not all of Australia's Indigenous peoples were similar in the way that they did things, and I think it's fascinating now when I sort of see what for example, my nieces are doing in school, because they've just started school, and the ways in which they are sort of interfacing with Indigenous culture is just light years ahead of what I had it when I was young. But then of course there's still always the constant debates about the black armband view of history in Australia, where for a decade or more it's sort of been raging, more than a decade. The Conservative government in Australia saying, we've got to teach the great things about our history. We can't just teach Indigenous massacres and things like that all of the time, because it's just it doesn't represent Australian history. Whereas the frontier wars, as they're known, went from something like 1788 until I think the last massacre was in 1923. So it was 100 years war. You know what I mean? It was more than 100 years. So I think that's I mean, the debate still rages, and that's good. I guess it's good in a way, because it does focus and drive certain states who have a more, I guess, Labor government to sort of say fuck you to the government and introduce their own sort of curriculums that sort of encourage a more nuanced view of Indigenous culture.
I think that type of history would be beneficial also in the UK, like when we're talking about things. So looking at current stuff with Brexit and stuff like that, when we're talking about things like the Northern Ireland backstop, or when we're talking about things like making trade deals with India, for the British people, or a lot of the British people who don't understand the history behind it, like the idea that we'll show up in India and tell them we'll give them a good trade deal, India might not be particularly overjoyed with that.
And there's this perception that everybody loves us,
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Northern Ireland is another prime example. I mean, I seen a guy on James O'Brien who was actually talking to Jerry about this. He had phoned up and he had said, why don't we just offer the Republic the chance to have dual citizenship with Britain?
Because offer them the chance to Brexit as well.
Because I can't
something else
imagine
that
they're going to
somebody had said. I think at the time they were sort of basically saying, was it like, I can't remember, but it was Priti Patel. What did she say? Can you guys remember what she said? She said something about nobody's been treated this bad by the British in Ireland since. I don't know. I can't remember, but I'm sure you guys will think of it later.
She basically belittled the idea of Irish suffering at the hands of Britain.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and I mean, she's not that old.
Yeah. No, but I mean, but for me, I think being so close to home, like just across the water, so few people in the UK have any kind of grasp of Irish history or Irish politics and the sort of treatment of Ireland at the hands of the British Empire, and it's a stone's throw away.
Well, I mean, I find it incredibly frustrating because I was teaching in Lowestoft, which is, this was the poorest school that I sort of worked at. And, they had kids coming into class chanting, EDL, Tommy Robinson. Like, no shit, that's what they're doing.
Wow.
And they're sort of blaming the problems of the town on what, like the 3 or 4 Portuguese families that live down the street. And it's like, and it would be great to sit these kids down and sort of say, actually, that's not the case. And this is why, things are a bit shit for you, and sort of go through like all the multiple things, the complex interactions that brought them to where they are in terms of, policy and austerity and, hundreds of years of history of city versus country and things like that. But, these kids haven't had breakfast half the time, and they haven't, it's like they need to know their history, but there are bigger things that they need to focus on getting through the day. So it's really frustrating to me because these kids will go out of school and then they'll be sold a view of history by someone like Britain First or Generation Identity or whatever far-right group is out there, and they'll think, okay, yeah, our country used to be fantastic, but we don't have a shot in when we're in school because we teachers don't have a chance to really get through to them because things are that difficult for them, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. I mean, like, to be honest, myself and Paul both come from an area which is pretty deprived, one of the foremost deprived council areas in Scotland, which happen to be the 4 areas of Scotland which voted for Scottish independence. It was the four poorest places, and the schools that we went to growing up, we both went to the same primary school and secondary school, and there was a lot of deprivation, a lot of, as you talked about earlier, just low level disturbance all the way through all your classes. So it makes the opportunity to learn that much more difficult for everybody.
But even understanding more modern history, I mean, our generation was probably the last generation that remembers the Ravenscraig, which was a large steel producing area that was here. And I mean, it was on record as being essentially some of the best steel, if not the best steel in the entire world. BMW were it was the only steel they would use, that type of stuff, and it's a kind of known thing. Obviously, during the 80s, that was part of the closures that happened under the Margaret Thatcher government and stuff. And now moving forward to the last general election, there's people in this area that is historically would never vote Conservative, but there was people, a relatively high number, proportionately a few thousand people voting Tories here, and that's history that is literally half a generation ago. Do you know what I mean? It's not even the next generation from us, and so I mean they don't even have an idea of that history around them.
But again, that's wrapped up in a certain type of unionism, a certain view of the British Empire, a certain view of the historical greatness of Great Britain.
Yeah, but I think one of the issues as well is that, and this is something I just read about for the Independent, is a lot of these kids who are having they've got a shit time. They're from broken homes. they're not, some of them, I taught a lot of kids who were malnutritioned and who, I know a lot of teachers who fed kids out of their own pocket. But, these kids go into a history class and they're taught, they're taught all of this shit about, the British Empire was actually really bad, and they're taught to them. It sounds like this litany of horrors, and they sort of do pick up that it's their fault. And you sort of get that stuff online, like, I wasn't around during all of this stuff. Why should I as a white man be sort of blamed for this sins of my ancestors and stuff? Yeah, exactly. And I mean, my clumsy solution to it is you got to find things locally that people should be proud of, and that's got to be something when they redo their curriculum. You've got to make a focus on local pride. I mean, I live in Luton at the moment. Just up the road is where one of the guys who wrote Amazing Grace was a priest, and he had a crazy life. Like, he was a slaver for many years, and was a complete drunk. But he sort of had this 180. We did a complete 180, and became like this fervent abolitionist, and helped was leading the struggle. And like, it's stories like that. It's things like people who really changed their local communities. You got to really give people something to be proud of, and I think you're going to get more people, more students, switching on in history class, because I think that's something we're missing. I think
it's too general.
Yeah,
you think the curriculum, like,
I think it's got to be local, and I think you've got to I'm as left and progressive as you come. Kids need to learn about the fact that their ancestors did some shitty things, but they've also got to learn that their ancestors didn't do shitty things as well, and that they had the opportunity to do shitty things and they didn't, and that moved things along. And I think you've got to celebrate. There's got to be some celebration.
Well, yeah, and for a child, that's important to have inspirational figureheads, and the more local, I guess, the better, because they can, in some way in their heads, relate to that.
Well, I mean, from where we are here, there's a place along the road called New Lanark. Yeah. New Lanark was like a big mill, but essentially when it was built, they had built it around the fact that it was going to have social housing for all the workers, and doctors were available and shops were available, and it was all built as a kind of community to be able to help the workers.
Well, they were working. He and Robert Owen was who put it together. So he introduced the idea of 8-hour days and weekends off back in like the sort of early 19th century. Like, he was.
So it was like a progressive, you sort of kind of thing.
Kind of, yeah. But the thing is, but unfortunately, it doesn't really get focused on. Like, I mean, like, not really.
Like, we were never taught any of that.
No. I mean, it's one of the things that the type of people that we are. We will find these things out, but most people don't have that luxury or that skill set.
And there's a great centre and stuff up there. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. There's all kinds of resources available to local schools, and I'm sure it is the case that now that they maybe are
probably more so
taking the kids there. But certainly when we were at school like 20 years ago, it's not something that was focused on at all. 20 years ago by ours, 27 years ago.
Yeah.
No.
But that's it though. No, not
20 years ago.
20 years ago. But that's the thing, like, our generation, unfortunately, is the same generation as people like Tommy Robinson and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? Or not far off it. So the problem you've got is, I mean, there's been
a gap there.
Yeah, there's that gap that we've experienced. He and making excuses for him here now, but essentially, him and his ilk only have either loose understanding of history and politics and the government and that go on at the present moment, or they have all that blame that we were talking about for all the bad things that happen, but they have nothing to be proud of apart from great British pride.
Okay, well, but let's look at Tommy Robinson for a minute then. If we're gonna start talking about Stephen Yaxley Lennon or Tommy Robinson, whatever the fuck you want to call him, I mean, are you suggesting then, Paul, that you think that his entire grift is based on ignorance on his part, or do you, like me, think that he's basically a fucking con man who's trying to wring every last penny out of his audience?
Well, quickly, I'll answer before we go to an expert on this, but I would say not so much him himself, but I think the people who are around him and the generation that he's got available to him, he was able to win over because of that
because
shame,
of those feelings,
because of the feelings, because of the lack of real pride in things, but then only having this kind of loose pride that Great Britain was Great Britain and it, conquered waves and stuff like that. And the reason that we see so much problems in Britain now is because that core Britishness is being diluted. Because if you don't understand the history, if you don't understand immigration, if you don't understand the fact that, it doesn't take that many years to go back for most of Britain to be immigrants anyway, then suddenly you become like, you've got this group of people that you can mold and you can shape and you can take their shame and their hurt and their blame and you can focus it in a way. And just so happens he's latched on to Islam as his.
But do you think that he has any political motivation, or do you just think he's just trying to fleece them for every penny he can?
I think there's probably a bit of both. I think he likes power. I think
he's a really interesting. Really, I'm not saying that I think he's a good guy. Of course not. Like completely the opposite. I think he's a real interesting guy, and I think when you look at how he got started, he first got together. The stories say he first his activism begun when there was some clerics in Luton who sort of basically were, I think they were sort of demonstrated the return of soldiers from the Royal Anglican Regiment, and that sort of inspired him to sort of kick off and start the EDL. But there are alternate stories that describe his motivations. I'll leave you to look them up some other time, but they might have something to do with his fondness for certain Class A substances. But anyway, but like when he was sort of growing up, I mean, I'm 30. How old am I? I'm 38. He's 36. So we're similar in age. Yeah. Thinking about the time that he was like a young man was, around the turn of a millennium. And back then Luton was, I mean, I live here. I love Luton, but it was a shithole back then.
Yeah.
There was a lot going on. There was a lot of gang crime. There was a lot of, there were a lot of problems, which were, caused by any number of factors. So there was nothing that would really, there was nothing around that he could sort of really bring around him and sort of, there was nothing local that he could sort of use to sort of say, hey, we're Luton, we're not going to put up with you mad clerics, talking shit about our soldiers. He sort of takes that sort of, prefabricated idea of Britishness, and, the Union Jack, the England flag, the bulldog, that sort of
jam in Jerusalem,
fighting spirit, and sort of, he takes that and, that sort of iconography and symbolism, really sort of appeals to people who don't have anything to be proud of, and they flock to it. And you sort of see, like, all these, all these football casuals and other people who've got nothing to really live for, and are often out of work, sort of finding that they have, a great struggle to become part of. And I think
he was a football casual of sorts, wasn't he? I mean, that's
yeah. I mean, that's where he took his name from. He took his name from one of the old Luton casuals, and he was kicking heads at football matches, but the whole all the symbolism and the iconography sort of gave him a legitimacy. It was the English Defence League. He was defending Englishness, which was construct that he completely sort of pulled out of the air.
And I guess history has taught us that if you want to unite a group of people in a struggle, then it's good to have a scapegoat of sorts. It's good to have an enemy and somebody to blame for all your problems. And in Tommy's case, it's been a crusade of sorts against Islam.
Yeah, from the very beginning, right? Yeah, and I mean, you sort of look at their symbolism. Back in the day when the EDL started out, they had the Templar cross on a shield, and as their symbol, and it's sort of going back to the Crusades. It's evoking, the clash of civilizations, the clash of religions, and it's a very easy archetype to sort of get people or not archetype. What's the word? It's a trope. It's something that people can say. Oh, I understand that. I understand a struggle between religions. They find it easy to sort of take solace in.
It's an easy idea to sell to people.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say.
It's also an easy target and a defined target as well. Do you know what I mean? Like if you decide, for example, that the same crusade was going against like Catholics in England, it's a lot harder to single out Catholics and work out where they are and work out what churches are what.
Yeah.
Muslims is an easy one. They all go to mosques. Most of them are like essentially brown people and not white people. So they
live in the same area together. So yes, Berry Park in Luton is it's where the Bangladeshi and the Pakistani communities are, and it was very easy for him to sort of say, look, this is a nest of vipers in our community who are trying to cause trouble and who are radicalizing young men. And they, to an extent, there were some extremist preachers who were radicalizing people. So it sort of they were working. That was working in his favor.
Yeah, it wasn't totally baseless.
No, it wasn't totally baseless, but it was completely overinflated.
Yeah,
and there was no nuance to it. It was black and white. But at the time, to a lot of young men, it seemed very, very appealing.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I didn't have to think about it.
It's the same. I mean, not to draw easy parallels, but like the same basic scenario as the rise of the Nazis and stuff like that. If you've got someone that you can blame, like the reason that your life is shit is not because you, but because of them, and them as a defined group that you can see and easily identify, then it means that
it's othering people. It's scapegoating people.
Yeah. So there was a group that he could very easily other that was still assimilating and that was still integrating into the community, so to speak. I mean, they were in the first couple of generations of being here, and he was lucky. I think this is the important point. He was lucky enough to do it at a time when there was a very powerful lobby that was emerging against Islam and against it was raised by any number of factors. Talking about 50 years of Middle Eastern politics here, but he kind of was very lucky in that he came out just at the time that the counter jihad movement was really taking off. So,
I mean, we would have been 18 and ballpark about 2002. So
yeah,
he is fortunately latched onto this just after 9/11 and just after as the Allied forces entering into the Middle East. So there is in the news, on the TV, Islam was bad. Do you know what I mean? Because they were the enemy of the world at that point.
He didn't have to do much work to start with. He just had to be seen to be visible, and it was kind of like 1 minute he's just a shit kicker hanging around Luton, and the next minute he finds that he's easily able to organize a crowd. Okay, and he's when you first see him, if you haven't sort of spent a lot of time around him, if you didn't know who he was and what he was doing, he doesn't. I don't want to say he's charismatic, but he's someone you listen to. He's someone you listen to.
He has a certain characteristic.
He holds a room well.
Yeah, exactly. Now, like I put it this way,
he holds a mob.
I put it this way. I went to the Day for Freedom rally last year to sort of cover it and sort of see, how the other half live.
Bit of a misnomer, that.
It was a complete Anyway, but that's not the point. So I'm up near the stage, and Tommy gets out of, like, I think a car pulls up, and Tommy gets out, and he's like got the aviator sunglasses on. He's got his smart jacket, really nicely cut jacket, and this crowd just envelops him immediately of ex-football casuals in there, like Tommy Robinson high-vis vests. And I was like, holy shit, is that Tommy? And I was like, you could sort of see him signing autographs, but there was something beyond that. Like, you could, I was like, whoa, maybe he's not that bad. Like, that was for a nanosecond I thought that. And then I thought, holy shit, no, he's a monster. Look how he works this crowd. Look how he works this crowd. It was that, it's off-putting, the sort of, like, a lot of people say, oh, don't be stupid. He's like just a loud, yob. But no, if you see him up close and you hear him speak, and you don't quite know what he's all on about, and you don't know his past, and you don't know various things about him. For a second, you can be bowled over.
Yeah. He has qualities which will endear him to a large amount of people.
Yeah, and that's what endeared him to groups in the US, such as the Gatestone Institute and the Middle East Forum, and things like that. And they've pumped millions into him.
Yeah, so that's something I'm really interested in talking about, actually. So I've seen some of the threads and stuff you've done, and various people have done online. And it's something that we've sort of touched on very briefly in some of our podcasts. But yeah, like to talk about that in a bit more depth. So, like the Gatestone Institute, the Middle East Forum, and their sort of funding, particularly of the Free Tommy campaign, and how that's came about, and what connections these think tanks, these right-wing US think tanks, kind of have. Where do they come from? Who are the politicians who are involved with them?
Well, I mean, they've all got strong links to the right-wing sort of Israeli, right. Basically, a strong link to right-wing Israelis for whatever value you want to give to them. But they're being, the money is coming to these organizations and institutions in the United States. The Middle East Forum being perhaps one of the chief, probably the big clearinghouse for the money, and that money from the Middle East Forum was responsible for paying for Tommy's legal defenses. His lawyers, basically, and his the rallies that were held in London over the course of the last year. So they sort of cover his operating costs as a figure
for his recent legal costs or previous ones as well.
No, like the stuff for the big
since his contempt of court charge, they have covered everything legal for him. Before that, the money was coming through a different way through a series of grants. I think they were Shulman Fellow grants. I think I hope I got the surname right. They went to Rebel Media. So that when he used to work for Rebel Media, that was enabled by a grant through a partnership between the Middle East Forum and the Robert Shulman Foundation or Institute. I can't remember the exact name there. But,
racist grants? No one told me this. I'm in the wrong game. I didn't realise you could just get racist grants.
No. So yeah, I mean that's how Rebel Media sort of employed him through that. But then he sort of realised that he could actually make a bit more money by himself. And I mean the money for him, that's like, he has been living off the donations that have been coming in via PayPal and various other sources. There is some discussion of the fact that he's made a lot of money, had a lot of money sent to him through Bitcoin. And there's currently some investigations going on there as to where that money comes from, because it can be quite difficult to sort of follow the path through the various exchanges. But no, when he was in prison, he made £2 million.
So not a bad lift, is it?
So that was like, how long was he in prison for? I think he was in prison for just over 2 months.
Yeah, about 6 to 8 weeks. I thought it was.
Yeah. And he's basically, since then, I think he's held his Brexit betrayal rally, he's held his Panorama thing in Manchester. And prior to them, he's put out a number of emails each saying, "I can't do this without you." However, I found this really interesting. He's had one of the figures, one of the women from the Middle East Forum, a woman called Lisa Babounis, has been over. She says, "Oh, I'm just doing this of my own free will. I'm just doing, I'm not representing the Middle East Forum." But she's been involved in organising all of these things. So what the hell is going on? She can't like Tommy that much. So there is the discussion that they are still giving him a great deal of money for operating costs, and there are still a lot of people donating to him on the regular, because he's still got various channels to do it, even though PayPal's kicked him off.
And what's concerning is that there's also some UK politicians that have links to some of these institutes as well. I mean, obviously we know that Tommy Robinson was invited into
House of Lords
the
for
House
dinner.
of Lords recently.
Lunch, as it was, wasn't it?
But we also have we have some prominent Jewish politicians in the UK have given talks to the Gatestone Institute. We have people like Steve Bannon who've given talks to the Gatestone Institute. John Bolton he was funded. His campaign was funded in some ways by Gatestone Institute. So there's links across the Atlantic between the far right in America and the far right in the UK. And Steve Bannon's obviously been given a platform within the UK mainstream media to go on the BBC and the Channel 4 and to talk up Tommy Robinson as a man of the people, a great man, somebody who we should be proud of in this country.
It's something that I find particularly bizarre is the way that these link up. Obviously, Steve Bannon is Breitbart News. Breitbart News is part of the right wing in America. Right wing in America is traditionally anti-Semitic. He does stuff for pro-Israel groups. It just.
Well, I think there's an important distinction that needs to be made. I mean, there's the far right that is backed by Israel for their own. Well, not even Israel, but the right in Israel.
Yeah.
It's one section of the right, one section of the Israeli government that sort of believes these things, and that's one particular strain which is sort of focused on provoking this sort of conflict between the European world and in Islam, and then there's the other right, which is deeply anti-Semitic, and is a bunch of white nationalists and don't want to have anything to do beyond the US's borders.
Yeah. But obviously there is there's a foreign policy aim. There's gain for these far right Jewish groups in harbouring resentment towards the Muslim world. Of course, it makes sense for them to do it. If you're looking at it rationally, you can almost understand why they would go down that route in terms of their sort of foreign policy, in terms of the position of Israel within the Middle East. They would be seeking to.
Yeah. Looking at the relationship between Israel and Palestine, looking at the grabs for land and the way that they're trying to justify taking more land. It does make sense, but they're playing a very wide game to sort of achieve that.
Well, yeah. When it gets to the extent that you realise that they're paying massive, like hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of legal fees for Tommy Robinson to be running about courts in Yorkshire and putting phones in jurors and witnesses, and people have been accused of grooming and being part of paedophile gangs. It's one of those ones where if you sort of say it out loud without actually looking into the details of it and connecting the dots, it sounds quite mad.
Yeah. But then again, one thing that it strikes me is that the right have always been better at working together. So disparate groups with not completely similar goals are able to come together and achieve much greater things, whereas a lot of groups on the left,
too desperate.
They won't work. You get 4 or 5 different left-wing groups in a room, and there'll be punches thrown within 5 minutes.
Well, that's it. I mean, that's it. The left wing are particularly terrible at this. They're like across the board. They're terrible online. They're terrible about unifying their beliefs. They're terrible at standing up against fascism. Like you can have an argument. You can watch an argument online that a fascist says something, and then 4 different representatives from different left-wing groups argue about the left stance on the other side of it. It's madness.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I'm always despairing about, because particularly, with when you talk about the issue of anti-Semitism, sometimes you just want to, completely and without any qualifications whatsoever. Say, anti-Semitic language, anti-Semitic behavior, anti-Semitic tropes being used are unacceptable. Then you'll have that one dude from that one group say, but blah, 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 blah. They'll come up with some justification for using that language, and you're like, no, come on, dude.
Yeah. Stop being too liberal. Stop being too liberal here. Like, we get it. You're liberal. We understand. But there is a line.
But I mean, the right wing is also very good at sort of getting rid of, putting differences. I've said they're very good at putting differences aside, but coming up with a message that they might not like it, but they'll unify people. And they'll put it out. They can unify. They can unify, and they can put a message out there. Whereas, yes, on the left wing, like you say, can we just have this one statement that says anti-Semitism is not acceptable any way, shape, or form? And as you've seen over recent things with Labour in England, they can't agree on any definition of it. Or
if I think that Corbyn missed an opportunity to sort of nip it in the bud early in the summer, like June time or whatever. They could have just said, "Yeah, we're going to accept all the IHRA definitions of anti-Semitism. We're going to accept them all. We're not going to have
a committee to sit down and look at.
We're not going to have a really loud public Barney, which is involving."
Yeah. We're not going to pull apart examples and put our own examples in it. We're just going to, and like realistically, even if you have, as you were talking about the right wing, they may have some private qualms about some of the statements that are being made on behalf of their movement. You can quietly have them in private, but still do the public thing, which makes the movement look okay and not mad and not anti-Semitic, because realistically, it's a tiny percentage of people out there. Any percentage is not okay, by the way. Any percentage is not okay for anti-Semitic language or behaviour, but it's something which has been focused on so heavily because of the complete failure of the left in the UK, and in particular the Labour Party, to just deal with it properly.
And I mean, even when talking about the two different types of right-wing groups, there's definitely a Venn diagram where they cross over, where, like, I don't know, Tommy Robinson in the middle as being the saviour for all of them, or whatever.
Still great, and it's
yeah, they agree with him.
Yeah, he is a bridge to those groups. I mean, he is I've been writing recently about the fact that now that he's been deplatformed from various services, he's likely to go a bit more extreme. And for years, he's been buddying up to the identitarian movement in Europe, who have some strongly anti-Semitic links in terms of the kinds of groups that they associate with and that they are a part of. I mean, Generation Identity has got, full of neo-Nazis.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, certainly the Polish groups, there's a lot of neo-Nazis in the Polish right-wing groups at the present moment. But they'll still sit down with Steve Bannon and Tommy Robinson and let them do talks and stuff like that, you know what I mean, and interact with them, discuss with them.
I mean, Steve Bannon's been consistently touring all of the sort of right-wing identity-based movements across Europe, all the anti-EU, Eurosceptic movements across Italy, France, Hungary, etc.
I'd say he just doesn't want to be in America now during the current court cases that are going on, because he might not be allowed back out the next time.
Well, I mean, he is. I mean, what did I read the other day? He's currently focusing on Italy. He's got he's creating he's teamed together with a mad Englishman who's bought a monastery, like an 8th century monastery in.
I'm a little bit disappointed that he didn't build one.
No, I would have liked it if he'd built one, but like he wants to establish a similar series of these monastery sort of training centers. They're not monasteries; they're training centers across Europe to create nationalists that'll fight for their countries, and
nationalist Knights Templar.
That sounds like
Europe.
It should definitely be illegal.
Yeah, it also sounds
this is the thing. I mean, he wants to create this network of nationalist training centers across Europe. A pan-European nationalist.
Yeah. That sounds.
It sounds like a bad story from James Bond or something.
Yeah, but there is the
EU for the EU for Eurosceptic.
Yeah. I mean, I always say this when I'm talking about the far right in Europe at the moment. For a bunch of nationalists, they are incredibly good at working across borders and formulating policy together.
Internationalist, nationalists.
Yeah. Yes.
They're pretty.
Yeah.
So moving forward into where we're kind of up to currently with Tommy. He's got out of jail. He's bought himself a nice big house.
He has.
He's kind of got quite prominent on the likes of Facebook. One of the big stories that followed him around recently was when he he decided to victimize the victim of bullying that
Jamal.
Oh yeah, he bullied the Syrian boy.
Yeah, he bullied the lad who was already being subject to quite horrific bullying at his school, and this has sort of led to what's happened. Well, I mean, today, Mike, so you want to talk us through that?
Okay, all right. So, I think it was was it October or November? Anyway, late last year, Syrian boy had been horribly brutalized and bullied in Huddersfield by a number of people. It wasn't just the one bully, but the local authority weren't doing anything to help him, which was the reason that the video was released. And this was this one particular individual pouring water on him, on John Jamal, and sort of basically, beating the crap out of him. But following that, after the media cottoned onto the story, and crowdfunders started to raise money to get him and his family out of the situation, Tommy Robinson leapt into the situation and made an extraordinary number of claims about Jamal. One of them was, I think Jamal had a cast on his arm, and he sort of said, "Oh, he got that from fighting and bullying girls," and all sorts of things. So basically, casting him as this sort of out of control, loudmouth, horrifically violent individual. And that led to Jamal and his family having to leave Huddersfield very, very quickly because of the number of threats that were coming their way. And, there were another series of comments were made a couple of days later when Tommy Robinson interviewed the bully, and sort of, said some even more nasty stuff about, how he, Jamal's time at the school. And following that, a lawyer from London, a guy, well, I call him Taz, Mohammed Akanji, had decided that, contacted the family and offered his services and for defamation, because, basically Tommy's said a whole lot of stuff that is provably untrue, which can be, demonstrated as untrue when you look at the records that were in fact kept by the school and other individuals. He's being taken to court for defamation, but as part of that defamation case, there are two really interesting aspects here. One of them is that they are looking at Tommy Robinson's finances in order to make sure that he can't hide them and, sort of put them all, give them to his wife or something. So that's one really interesting sort of thing that's been made clear by the lawyers in various places. But they're also looking to talk to Facebook and Instagram. Well, they're basically the same company, and sort of examine their role in disseminating and in the spreading the lies about Jamal.
Yeah, and giving Tommy a platform to do that.
Yeah, Facebook at the moment has been sort of saying, "Oh, we're just a platform. We're not we don't exert any kind of editorial control over what gets pushed out." And that question of whether they are just a platform or a publisher, or whether they take an editorial role, is one that's being looked at in the upcoming court case. So,
well, I think one thing that we know for sure is that you can pay to boost posts, you can pay to advertise these things, and I know that Tommy Robinson has paid to boost posts in the past, so it's understandably Facebook know that they can make money from people like Tommy Robinson, and as long as nobody's giving them any grief for it, they're happy to take the money and run.
And the thing is, if he's making £2 million when he's in jail, he can drop much more money than you or I can drop into an advert. You could drop 100 grand into an advert. Do you know what I mean? In the grand scheme of things, and really
think about it this way. I mean, he had in excess of 1 million followers on Facebook before he was banned. Now, each time that he would live stream, those people coming to Instagram or Facebook would be seeing ads, which had been served up, and people, Tommy would post something like 6 or 7 times a day. So he's getting, hundreds of thousands of people on looking at his posts, 7 or 8 times a day. He's bringing in a hell of a lot of revenue for Facebook.
Yeah, he's driving traffic.
Right. And there was a huge, one of the big stories regarding Facebook last year, along with the Cambridge Analytica stuff, was the fact that, Tommy Robinson was placed into a special category that all sort of celebrities, notable figures are put in, that sort of protects them from being arbitrarily deleted or suspended. So, people were sort of saying, okay, hang on, why are you doing that? He's not a politician. He's not a, he's no one. He doesn't hold any particular office. So why? Okay, in the first place, why is he in this category? Number two, then there came out the revelations that even despite the fact that he'd violated the community standards over and over and over again, nobody was acting to,
there was no punitive.
Like they were told not to do anything.
Yeah.
Like people, he was getting so many reports that people were saying, oh, we need to take this up the chain, and people were saying, no, you don't need to. Facebook executives were saying, no, don't do anything about this. He makes us too much money. So, he was being protected. There are the Channel 4 expose sort of made it clear that he's being protected in a way that even politicians aren't being.
Yeah.
So that was fairly eye opening, and
I guess because if there was a politician out there, if Nigel Farage was able to attract the same kind of traffic towards Facebook's platform as Tommy Robinson, then he might get special protected status too. But the reality is that it's Tommy's popularity, as unpleasant as we might consider it to be, that has sort of given him this almost untouchable status, on the social media platform.
I mean, the reason I would imagine that they've had to act upon banning, other than the current pending court case, to sort of show that they're actually doing something.
Well, it's really interesting here because all the reporting regarding his banning said that he was given a final warning. He was sent a final written warning about this, and he's like, the first I knew about it was that I got this written warning. Bullshit. Yeah. I find that very hard to believe that either there's something very wrong going on at Facebook in terms of their interior processes, or he's considering it's just one of those things that blows my mind. Either he's lying through his teeth, and they've given it, but they've still given him like 20 chances, knowing all of the things that have been going on with his particular, all of the instances of harassment that he's been involved in, or they're just completely criminally negligent in sort of enforcing their own harassment policies.
Well, I mean, the other danger is obviously with the parliamentary paper that came out recently to do with social media. One of the things that were highlighted was defining and where the ownership actually stands with the platforms rather than the publishers of the information. There is no doubt that in the coming years, certainly at the very most, there are going to be changes that say some of this onus has to be put on the social media platform providers, and if they don't start showing that they're doing stuff, at least, especially with this current court case that's happening, one of the dangers is that they're going to find themselves going through all sorts of legal disputes that they realistically don't want to be in. They want to avoid that. these people.
No, I mean, they've already got so much going on.
Yeah, I mean, Zuckerberg doesn't even want to speak to the British Parliament because he knows that the inevitable fallout of that will be catastrophic because they ask the wrong question or say the wrong thing. It's going to work out real bad for them.
The other
I
thing
mean, it's a sorry, you go.
Sorry, from the perspective of a social media platform, it behooves them to act responsibly in terms of the content that's being pushed out, because what they don't want is ultimately they don't want to be legislated against.
No, they don't.
And if they continue to allow people to act with notoriety and act without any sort of comeback, then ultimately that is what's going to happen. The governments of the countries that they're operating in are going to be forced to legislate against them, and that's going to impact on their earning potential. So it behooves them to be much more responsible in terms of the content they're allowing to be pushed out from the platform.
At the same time, though, they are being squeezed by representatives of these groups. The people who are funding Tommy to sort of, they're making a real big free speech issue out of it, which is, it's incredible seeing some of these people who for years have been, like right-wing libertarians sort of saying, oh, we need the the government to step in and protect conservatives on Facebook. Like that's their big thing. They're sort of saying, a lot of the spiked crew and the from the Spectator crew and all that, they're sort of saying, if we're sort of, they're coming up with all these pompous editorials talking about the fact that, if we're sort of censoring somebody who has provocative opinions, then we're entering a new authoritarian dark age, which, it's bullshit. I mean,
but that's we've witnessed the opposite side of this. And a couple of years ago, we witnessed when the danger was they were going to start legislating. It was obviously the alt-right were big on the fact that if that's what happens, then essentially, if that's what happens, then we'll not have any free speech. And now it's like, well, if it doesn't happen, we're not going to have any free speech. I think we're through the looking glass at this point.
Well, we're also through the looking glass.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly, it's contradictory. It's it's one of these big things. It's where, it depends on the situation.
Right. So, I mean, first of all, we're through looking glass when the far right are suddenly the arbiters of free speech in this country. But also, the sort of free speech argument, I think that both political wings are guilty of hypocritical positions at times. If you take something like a good one is the cake maker in Northern Ireland who refused to make the cake because they didn't agree with it and whatever.
And I mean that's interesting because that's one that's always cited by a lot of these alt-right guys.
Yeah, over and over again. Essentially, the left were generally of the opinion that, well, they have to make the cake because the person wants the cake. And the business should have to provide them with, the thing that they've paid for. It's kind of the opposite argument here, with the likes of Facebook, where we're saying, well, no, they don't have to give this.
You don't have to host him. Yeah.
It's
the right one saying, you have to host him.
Exactly.
You are the platform.
Yeah, I mean, we are in this weird scenario. I don't even know who stands for what anymore because the problem, like.
No, and I think we're beyond it. I think we're literally
case by case.
Politics is completely broken in this case. It's a culture war.
Yeah.
There's no logic to it.
I mean, the other thing as well is there's a perceived free speech that exists in the UK because we've been Americanized in the way that we. So I mean, because there is the constitutional protection of free speech in the US, people in the UK will argue about it as if that also exists in the UK. It's like it doesn't. you don't have the right to say whatever you want.
No, and I mean that's something that I used to blow my students' minds. When they're talking about the idea, because I used to teach politics as well. We're talking about the idea of free speech, and that sort of I'd ask them, where does free speech come from in the UK? Like in this country, where does it come from? And they would they'd sort of I'd sort of say, there is no essential document that sort of guarantees your freedom of speech. It's several documents coming together. It's legislation, sort of forming it, and it's what the legislation doesn't say in some cases that is guaranteeing you your freedom of expression. And it's kind of interesting that perhaps one of the documents that you can point to now is European legislation about the European human rights.
Also, the fact that anything that does protect you, or anything that doesn't protect you, or anything that kind of covers it at the present moment, much the same as what we've seen during elections, that social media and the complete premise of social media in a lot of cases, for a lot of certainly the Brexit laws, it's not really covered. So we're in a grey area with a lot of stuff at the present moment where people can argue either way, because technically it's never been updated. Obviously, that's part of what the current
the culture
work, the current work that's happening to do with how they're going to reword it and change it. But at the present moment, technically, you're not protected by anything, because no one had really thought about what the Twitter sphere was going to be like in 2019.
Yeah. Facebook is completely broken. Politics, human rights, and almost everything.
Legislation is way behind the technology.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's really interesting. And I mean, but when I was sort of, I'm not going to I won't deny it. I wanted to see Tommy off Facebook and Instagram, and that's because what he was doing, and it is incredibly hard to argue against, argue my case here. It was really difficult to argue my case here, because it sound like, when you say it, it sounds mad. But I would be my line of argument here is that he was engaging in stochastic terrorism. Okay, he would pick a target. He would say, this person has done this. He wouldn't say, go and kick their ass, but the implication was there. Go and give this person a hard time, and he did that. He did that on a number of occasions, and he's done that twice in the last month with the personal trainer in Bradford who had classes for Muslim women, and a rape crisis line that had a special line for
Oh, I seen that. Yeah, for women of color, wasn't it? Yeah. So essentially, or women of not essentially non-white.
So in that instance, in these instances, he puts something up with the expectation that these people are going to be harassed. Okay, you can't sort of, it's incredibly hard to argue that and say to somebody, look, this is what he's doing. But the pattern is there. It happens over and over and over again. And
I mean, the suggestions here, it's like Kate Hopkins when she essentially makes out that people are cockroaches, or makes out people like, you're planting an idea without saying you should kill these people. Do you know what I mean?
But I mean, it's more than that with Tommy, though, because he knows historically what has happened to people he has previously pinpointed.
He has a violent following.
He knows what they're going to do. So he knows all he needs to do is sort of put up a poster, and that person
point him in the right direction.
Yeah,
give them a target.
Becomes a target, and he's very good. He's very good at it. I mean, this is sort of beside the point, but he's very good at establishing the narrative of him being the aggrieved party. Whereas as soon as somebody starts getting close to, making a real deep criticism about him, he arrives on their doorstep demanding right of reply. And he's sort of intimated, because I was sort of involved in publicizing this lawsuit. He's sort of threatened that he's going to turn up at my place. But what did I do to him? I've only ever criticized him in a way that,
reported the facts.
How do you feel about the possibility of him turning up at your door? We have recently, last month, we interviewed Stuart MacDonald, MP from up here. He turned up at Stuart's surgery in the library in Glasgow, his constituent surgery, demanding a right to reply, opportunity to speak to him, as if Tommy Robinson's some sort of bastion of journalistic principles. As we know, you've covered it pretty in depth on your Twitter feed. He turned up at basically the parents of a little boy.
Yeah, and he knew that the kid was at university. Yeah. So it's he knew that it was going to affect the kid more that he went to his parents' place than it would if he went to his. And I think if he turned up at a college, he would have been yelled out, shouted out of the place. But how do I feel about it? And in sort of dealing with these guys, you sort of develop a thick skin really quickly, and you can sort of you sort of get a feeling for what's bullshit and what's not bullshit.
Yeah.
And 99% of the time, you sort of get a Facebook message at 3 a.m. or somebody sort of leaving a message somewhere else threatening you, and you're like, yeah, okay, whatever, you're not going to do anything. I think it sort of became real to me the other week when I went up to Salford to speak at a rally, the counter rally to his little panorama thing.
Yeah.
And I've, obviously I know, I talk to a lot of people who are sort of connected, they've got little sock puppet accounts in sort of fascist places, basically. And when, I sort of got a message when I was coming into Manchester saying, oh, look, there's money for anybody who hospitalizes you today. So it's kind of like the stuff that you sort of hear about in passing that's not actually directed at you that you sort of have to worry about.
Yeah.
You missed a trick. You should have found out how much money it was and then cut yourself in the arm.
No, but I was sort of thinking, hey, look, there's some stairs here. I can.
where there's blame, there's a claim.
You'll get me some of that sweet Middle East Forum money.
Yeah, it was funny because in the afternoon after I left the rally, I went back to Manchester Piccadilly, and I was upstairs in the Starbucks. So I'm drinking my cold brew latte like a wanker, and Gerard Batten sits down next to me with his crew of senior citizens, because they were all. But I was kind of like, I was like, so you've come to claim the bounty. No, he wanted his bacon roll. He looked very defeated. But yeah, no. I mean, it's the stuff that, says, oh, I heard this, that, someone's going to turn up on your doorstep. That's the stuff I really worry about. If somebody's threatening you to my face, I don't care.
Well, I think for an ethical right to reply, in the event he wants to drop us over an email, and we could organise a Zencaster where he's sitting on, and you can talk it out over the microphone like adults rather than showing up at your door.
Sometimes I'd be happy to do that, but I'm fairly reluctant to sort of go on to, I get this all the time, Paul Joseph Watson's like, debate me, and I mean, Count Dankula has done that too. But the thing is if you go on to these, and this is one of the things, it's all about appearance, and it's all about, how they can shape your appearance on their show. You know what I mean? Like, they can cut you in any number of ways. Okay, and there's the fact that they've got a crowd listing, and that those people will sort of make stuff up on the spot based on what you say, and it sort of take things completely out of context, which is.
Well, if in the off chance he's listening to this, it'll be me that's editing it, and I'm lazy as fuck. So the chances that I'll edit it to make him seem bad are incredibly slim. So the opportunity's always there. So, curiously, just because you mentioned him, did you see the most short-lived sequence of events for Count Dankula on BBC Scotland? Essentially, BBC Scotland.
What it was announced that he had the role on this digital chat show yesterday.
And now it's gone.
4 p.m. today, it's gone. I mean, I don't hate the guy. I disagree almost completely with his politics and his entire perception of, what humor entails based on the Gas the Jews joke.
Yeah.
But, in what universe did that seem like a good idea?
I know, it's fucking mental.
In 2019, with all of the challenges that are faced by fracturing communities and, almost, historically low trust in government and civil society, does it seem like a good idea to put one of these alt-right guys? Because he kind of is.
Well, no, he is. So complete disclosure. Member, right? Complete disclosure. He's actually local to us. And we've got a lot of mutual friends. And the local pub that me and Jerry drank in all our days was certainly his other half, if not his, but his local as well. I mean, we have lots and lots of friends in common, and yeah, I mean, like in the grand scheme of things, like it's difficult to have a gas the Jews joke anyway, let alone one from a person that nobody really knows is a comic, and putting it on YouTube and then confess, I didn't know enough about YouTube to realise that everybody was going to see it, even though I've got a fucking channel on YouTube that I put videos on all the time.
The big problem for me with it is this, right? The BBC, trust in the BBC is at an all-time low, regardless, across the political sphere, and particularly in Scotland, the BBC, like the trust in the BBC is like rock bottom right now. So to decide that they're going to give this guy, of all the fucking varied and large talent pool in Scotland, they're going to give him a spot on a digital chat show, given his fucking history and his political history, is baffling to me.
He's the only Scottish YouTuber that I can think of that you can search his name plus Tommy Robinson and get a picture of it.
The thing is, he continuously, cries about the fact that somebody's called him a Nazi or a fascist or something like that. But then he instantly turns around and will interview someone like, Colin Robinson, Millennial Rose, who last year called for the murder of an EU migration official, and is who are an avowed white nationalist, and gives them an easy ride and agrees with them. Yeah. Jesus, come on!
I know. I don't. He's got absolutely no right to complain about anything that's happened to him, or all the money that's paying for his wedding.
It does give us a good idea though where the BBC think their programming's going for the next year. Seems a bit dark in my opinion in Scotland, but each to their own, I suppose.
So one of the interesting things about today. So Tommy Robinson is part of the defamation case that's been brought on behalf of Jamal, the Syrian boy, meant that papers had to be served at Tom Robinson's home.
Yes. This is. So you want me to talk about this?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Oh, you're right. So obviously, the law firm or the lawyer who's been sort of taking the lead on the Tommy case wanted to make sure, doubly sure, that Tommy got the letter. Actually went out two different ways, and he wanted to make a bit of a spectacle out of it, since since this is what he does. He goes to people's places and doorsteps them and puts them
exactly. So it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. Right?
So yeah, I mean, he was looking at various people, and eventually he sort of came on to Dick Coughlin. I can't say it properly. Who is a YouTuber who has made videos about Tommy for almost 10 years, I think. Who's a real critic. I don't know if you've checked him out, but he's a funny guy.
Check it out.
Yeah, he's sort of got red hair. He calls he's an ex crackhead basically.
Right.
Absolute. He's a funny guy, but he does spot on takedowns of various right wing figures. But he became involved. So they went and they picked up the letter from the law officers in Mayfair in London, and then they drove about an hour up to Silsoe, which is the little village where Tom lives, and went to deliver. Was sort of videoed the whole thing, and when they got there were three cop cars out the front of Tommy's place, and Dick wasn't able to actually go up to the door and give the letter, because the cops were like, "Oh no, we'll take that off you. We'll make sure that Tommy gets it." And this is all they're very amusing, because Tommy's a great big fan of going up to somebody's house and with a camera crew and some scary individuals, whereas the second that he finds out that someone's likely to do something, and this was actually it's a lawful thing that they were doing, serving a letter. He was employed by the law firm for the day to do it, and he he freaks out and he gets 3 cop cars. And, it's massively hypocritical.
Well, and yeah, so I mean, what level of police protection is Tommy Robinson receiving on a day-to-day basis? Because he's been hypercritical of police involvement in, some of his previous
Oh, he
doorstepping
talks down the
attempt.
cops every day. Every
I
day.
believe at least one of his many convictions involves a police officer
Oh,
assault.
that's a very interesting story. You
As
should look
indeed.
it up sometime.
I was reading through your tweets about it not so long ago, to be honest, oddly enough.
Yes, yeah, well, yeah. I mean, he's got a rather interesting relationship with the police, so it's very interesting that some of Bedfordshire's finest, that so many of Bedfordshire's finest are basically employed to sit outside his house and stop anybody from.
Actually,
Much of the criticism that was levelled at Stuart MacDonald by Tommy was due to the fact that so many police had to get involved in keeping
him safe. I mean, he made a big deal about how he was hiding and the police had to be there to protect him. Weirdly, actually, I'm personal friends with a reasonable number of Bedfordshire's finest, so I might drop them down a message and see what they have to say about it all. Obviously, officially nothing as far as this recording goes.
It's just fascinating how he's really, really willing to take police protection and all the security that they can afford at one moment, and then spend the rest of his time saying that the police are actually being infiltrated by Muslims who are secretly trying to bring down the government, and that the police aren't doing enough to destroy the enemy within. So
it's almost as if, Mike, he's a man with next to no principles who'll say anything in order to garner support.
I'm trying to actually understand this process though. So see if I chose to never pay my electricity bill and the electricity company came to have a debt collector to come and get my information, and I had got the police involved to protect me, so the police then don't, so I say they never get to come to me and I never get to sign anything. Surely if you're working for the company that is serving the papers from the lawyer and you show up at the police and you're working, the police are there, so viably you're not going to just fucking jump on and start punching him in the head or anything. Surely is there no kind of legal requirement that if you're there, you have to get, if he's there, he has to give him the papers?
My understanding from a lot of Tommy's whinging that I've become familiar with via the internet is that he has essentially permanent police protection at this stage.
He's had a couple of you guys know what an Osman warning is?
Yes.
Yeah, so a credible threat to life because some idiot, some fuckwit has actually has it out for him, and that sort of means that there's the sort of little panic buttons that you can get, which I mean they're sort of designed for people who have an abusive spouse or something like that. Yeah. So he's basically permanently had one of them parked in his house, and he's got a line to the cops because he's had a few Osman warnings. So I think it's highly, I mean, obviously the police have to stop a crime from being carried out, but it's a huge waste of time and resources in this case.
And he's kind of brought it. I'm not saying that this makes it okay, but if you spend your entire life showing up at people's doors and threatening them, and then you have to phone the police to protect you because someone said they're going to show up at your door to threaten you.
He's a huge coward. He's a pussy. He's a raving hypocrite. But
I imagine with paranoia.
It's just I think maybe questions need to be asked about exactly how much money is being spent on this charade. Because I mean, he talks about police being cut and police going around and giving people a hard time for cracking an offensive joke, whereas he's taking up almost all the time of police officers from his local station.
Surely he knows a couple of lads who could work as a militia and just stand about his garden to protect them in the grand scheme of things. They're always got masks on. They're always there at all his rallies. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, he has his own security in inverted commas.
Yeah.
The sort of the defining factor seems to be, or the thread that binds them seems to be that they've spent time in jail. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is interesting because I know certainly. Certain individuals have been more than happy to accompany him on his midnight jaunts to the parents of young students who've slagged them off on Twitter. So where are these supposed hard men, 24/7 at his house? If why can they not take the place of Her Majesty's finest?
There's probably a queue for the bathroom, to be honest. So they're probably all busy. Like,
yeah.
I don't know what you could possibly be.
So he's gone. Like he's made a big deal out of the fact that today was chosen because we knew that he would be he would be overseas. He was in Finland at some sort of right-wing film screening, but he's
sounds shite.
He's making a big deal out of saying that that it was planned for this, but actually it's been in the works for months. And if he was there, he was there, but he just happened to be not there on this particular day. And he's sort of, gone nuts and started raving about all the people that are against him, the media, Muslims, hope not hate. I got into the mix somewhere just because I've been tweeting about it. So he's probably going to turn up at mine because I'm the closest.
I like the idea that there's a list and it's just like the media, Mike, Islam,
I didn't watch I hadn't watched the video, and then someone said, "Who's named you?" And I'm like, "Okay, why did he name me?" And he's blaming all the people that everybody who brought this thing on him, and I was like, "I did fuck all." I made a video saying donate to the crowdfunder, and I was critical of him. Now he's sort of wanting to doorstep me because of it.
This kind of caliphate on him. I'm surprised that's not the term he's using here, to be honest.
Well, I think that what you have done, although you might not consider it to be anything major, has been well worthwhile, Mike. And we will, us and our listeners, I'm sure, will continue to follow you with glee on Twitter to see what you're up to next.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking to some groups like Tell Mama, who are the non-profit that sort of look at basically there's Islamophobia, about making a series of videos about looking at some of the major racist groups in the UK and sort of taking the piss out of them. So that should be something that could you look forward to in the next coming months. So,
Good man, sounds good. Sounds good. Well, thanks very much for taking the time to speak to us this evening, and we'll hopefully get a chance to chat with you again soon. Thanks for the interview, man.
No worries. Thank you very much.